Hello, today we will go back in time to the 1970s, 1990s. Go on a 12-year hunt to learn about a notorious serial killer. He committed more than 50 murders with extremely brutal and savage methods, even escaping capture many times. The entire police force saw the man as the Russian Reaper. Most of the murders happened in Rostov, so people gave him the nickname, the Butcher. Top story begins in Rostov, a land near Ukraine where the river Donhin Hoa passed through thanks to the fertile land here with all kinds of agricultural crops and livestock. Very developed on a Sunday, December 24, 1978, around 1:00. In the afternoon in Sakti city of Ro province, a man was walking along the riverbank of Group Sepk when suddenly he saw a floating object was floating on the river, thinking that someone was drowning. He hurriedly ran to the river bank to see clearly, but when he got there, near him, Hone discovered that it was the body of a person floating in the water without any movement. He was so shocked. The man was afraid and immediately went to the nearby police station to avoid reporting the incident. After receiving the report, the police quickly arrived at the scene. School and proceed to recover the body of the victim. The victim is a dead girl. The little girl had a scarf tied around her head, and her body had many obvious wounds. This was a murder and brutality case. The perpetrator dumped the victim's body in the river. The police immediately blocked off the scene and began investigating the case. School about 150 meters upstream, they found a school bag. Inside the bag, there were books and a notebook with names. Zakat Nova Edina's parents later came to identify and confirm the victim. It was their 9-year-old daughter who the two said had been missing since 2 days before the morning. Their daughter went to school as usual, but then did not see home. The scarf on Anina's body was hers. The results of the examination. The autopsy showed that Anina died on December 22, 2 days before. Before the body was found about 6:00 p.m. on the same day, the autopsy results were announced. The cause of death. Ren's death was determined to be due to asphyxiation by strangulation. However, in addition to the wound, there were many other wounds on her neck, and on her body there were many stab wounds on her right eye. There were 3 stab wounds on her abdomen. The lacerations in the genital area and rectum indicate that the victim was sexually assaulted before death. Police are investigating. People living near the riverbank area and have narrowed down the 2 suspects. The first suspect is CHIKATILO, 42 years old. Some people said that around evening 2 days ago they saw Anina standing talking with a tall man. Another neighbor at the nearby bus stop said that at about 7:00 p.m. the same day he saw lights in Chikatilo's wooden house was still bright even though he rarely went there. The police had. Chikatilo was summoned to give his statement, but he denied any involvement in the case. He said that he rarely went to that wooden house and that day just stopped by to clean up a bit and then left immediately. Due to lack of evidence, the police forced him to. Chikatilo must release the second suspect, Alexander Kravchenko, 25, 8 years ago. Kravchenko once sexually assaulted a 10-year-old girl while drinking alcohol and then strangled her. The victim died and gouged out his eyes. He buried the victim's body in his own garden. The case was quickly exposed. However, due to committing the crime as a minor, Kravchenko was only sentenced to 15 years in prison. After serving 6 years, he was released. Early freedom, and joined the construction team at Kravchenko's house, was located very close. Innocent crime scene plus a criminal record, he naturally came into the police's sights. However, Kravchenko 1. Inc. confirmed that on December 22 after work, he went to a friend's house to pay off a debt and stayed there all evening. This friend also confirmed Kravchenko's testimony and said that Kravchenko came to his house at about 6:00 8:00 p.m. that day, to pay for the radio he bought earlier. However, Kravchenko said that today he hasn't paid off all his debt, yet after paying off the loan they sat and talked for another 10 minutes. Kravchenko's wife also confirmed that her husband came home at 6:15 p.m. that day and did not go out with her. The above statements reduced the police's suspicion of Kravchenko significantly, and they also could not find him any evidence related to the case on Kravchenko's person. Finally, the police decided to release him for a while. Sometime later, the police found a new suspect, Gr. Joseph, 50 years old and night. December 31st, while on night duty at another station, Gr. Joseph and his colleagues were drinking and chatting while drunk. I bragged that I strangled the little girl mentioned in the press. My colleagues knew well G. Joseph, often ba. Hoakok Lak was drunk, so no one paid attention to what he said. But just a few days later, rumors spread. Joseph is the one who really harmed Alen. Lan started to steal the place where the police had to train Joseph to get his statement. Denied and said he just said something boring when drunk, but unexpectedly it was passed around by others and became like this later. Police also did not find any evidence to prove that C.I. Gop committed a crime. What no one expected was that a few days later G. Joseph died doing something stupid, but he turned out to be a very respectful man. Honor after being suspected of being a child molester, he was under great psychological pressure. G. Joseph to Novo Scat. Visiting his daughter, he drank some wine and confided in her, crying and saying that he had never harmed her until the 8th of the month. One daughter, G. Joseph, came home from work and found out that her father had passed away. Joseph's tragedy shocked many people. Some even thought he was murdered. Rumors also circulated that he had a conflict with his daughter. What really happened? Perhaps only insiders know what happened 2 weeks after Alina's case. New developments: a neighbor of C.P. Chenko came to report a theft. The police searched Kravchenko's house and found the neighbor's belongings in the apartment. Sep Kravchenko was arrested immediately, after which he tried to confess to the theft. Stole from himself and his guests, that he broke into his neighbor's house and stole things when they were not home. However, during the police found that Kravchenko was involved in 2 cases within a month, so they started investigating the cable car case. Suspected he was involved in Adna's case, although C.P. Chenko has someone working alibi, but police still doubted the authenticity of the testimony. They decided to arrest Kravchenko's friend and his wife again. Kravchenko's friend still maintained her original testimony. Kravchenko's wife also initially testified same as before. However, after knowing that she was suspected of covering up for a crime, she hastily admitted that on the day Anina missing, Kravchenko didn't come home at 6:15 p.m. but after 8:00 p.m. more. When he got home, Kravchenko was still drunk. With the statement of Kravchenko's wife, the police arrested him. A period of detention on 16 February. Under psychological pressure, Kravchenko was tried to admit to the murder of Anina and wrote a detailed statement in the report. CRP Chenko stated that on the afternoon of that day, after drinking, he was sitting on a rock at the bus stop when a bus stopped and 5 or 6 people getting out of the car. Among them was a little girl who approached him to ask for directions. At that time, because he was drunk and not clear-headed, Kravchenko couldn't remember what he had done. When he woke up, he found himself in the river, and the little girl was lying motionless on the ground, surrounded by blood. Realizing he had killed someone, C.P. Chenko looked into the girl's eyes in fear, and then used the victim's scarf to kill her. Catch the girl and throw her body into the river, clean the blood off her body. C pretends to be his wife as if nothing happened and returns. However, a month later, Kravchenko suddenly changed his statement. He claimed that his previous confession was coerced, and continued to maintain his innocence for the next month. Grabchenko kept changing his testimony, sometimes admitting guilt and sometimes denying it. In August of the same year, Grabchenko once again admitted to murdering Anina. The court heard that Grabchenko was guilty of murder. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. However, he still insisted on his innocence and appealed to a higher court after 3 years. The Supreme Court upheld the July 1983 first instance judgment. Grabchenko was sentenced to death for murder. Anina Nova officially closed, but similar tragedies seem to have not stopped at Rostov. September 1983 police. Rostov has conducted a combined investigation of 6 cases that occurred from June 1982 to August 1983, due to suspicion that these were related cases committed by the same. The perpetrators of the 6 victims' bodies in these cases were, in chronological order, 13-year-old newborns. Irina Kupin, now 16, Tuvi Olga Stomkov, 10. Age Natalia Jova, 13 years old. Igor Zhikov, 7 years old, except Igor Zhikov is male. Year of birth. The remaining victims were all female. The victims' bodies were electrocuted in various locations such as Donskoy St. Lovos Acton and rural areas of Vizo Don belong to the city, mainly in remote areas. Hiding in the forest, all the victims had similar injuries on the head and upper body, had many wounds caused by stabbed with a knife or sharp object. The eye sockets were stabbed, or the eyes were gouged out on the victims' bodies. All showed signs of being stabbed. Special abuse on the body of 10-year-old Tom's chest was slashed open. Due to the lack of witnesses and very few clues, the police suspected the killer. This series of mentally ill people arrested a man with abnormal psychological symptoms at a G in Rop. This man showed signs of mental retardation after being arrested. This man said that he and a friend, another mentally disabled man, stole a car and killed a child. Police continue to arrest the suspect's friend. This person also often admitted to theft and murder. However, when asked by the police about the remaining 2 cases, the man began to speak incoherently and gave inconsistent descriptions of the crime scene, information about the victim's appearance, and the crime scene that these 2 people declared did not match the case file. They even confessed to some crimes. Other incidents occurred during their detention, after which the police continued to arrest several of the 2's schoolmates. The suspects are all students of a vocational school for intellectuals. However, due to difficulties in the communication that the investigation has made no significant progress, the police have jokingly called this case the case of the idiot. They believe that these people are not the real culprits. In the process of investigation, the police continue to find out. More traces of the serial killer were found at various locations on the bodies of new victims. In addition to the stab wounds, other common features such as tongues or nipples being removed were also found. The number of victims was also not limited to less than 20, the oldest being a 44-year-old woman. As time went on, the number of murder cases increased, and the police also gathered more clues. In January 1984, police discover the body of a 14-year-old boy in the East River, near a train station in the East River. With more than 70 stab wounds on the body, genitals were removed, and semen was found in the anus 3 months later by the police. A thick mark suspected to be that of the murderer in another case was found, a classmate of the victim said. Before that, the girls saw the victim talking to a tall, thin man wearing glasses and a hat at the bus stop. The man put on glasses and a hat so the girl's face could not be seen clearly. 9th 1984, one evening 2 bird policemen were on patrol duty at the station kitchen truck near AVT Park, where the bodies of 7 victims were discovered. Police previously suspected the killer could have been. Ability will return to the crime scene. In the crowd, they discovered a man about 45 years old, about 1.8 m tall. A thin man wearing glasses and carrying a black leather briefcase, except for the absence of a hat. Other features of the man. The above all match the sketch of the serial killer that the police had previously released about the man's behavior. The man above also had many suspicious points about Trung. He didn't seem like he was waiting for the bus. The two undercover police decided to continue. Closely followed the man. A few minutes later, an airport bus arrived. The man blended in with the voice and stepped on. Two undercover police cars also followed after the man got in the car and started driving, chatting with a girl in a skirt sitting next to him. However, the girl, who was not very enthusiastic about meeting him again, did not receive any response. The man was silent, but his eyes never left her. The bus continued to move and more people got on. Suddenly, a woman screamed and accused the car of being harassed. The woman pointed straight at her. When a man beat and loudly cursed him for touching her, the two argued back and forth very fiercely. The surrounding passengers also spoke up to admit that they witnessed the man's disruptive behavior. The accused was the subject being followed by two undercover police officers. Seeing that he could not argue, the man quickly got out of the car. At the next stop, two undercover policemen also secretly followed the man out of the car. Continued to stay quiet in the crowded area, waiting for the beeping car to turn around and get on another car, probably for fear of being discovered. The man chose to sit next to a girl and tried to catch the pass. However, the girl did not respond and continued to hold her. The girl stood up and got out of the car. The man hurriedly followed but couldn't catch up. The girl ran away and lost sight of the man, who continued walking. Wandering on the road, two bird policemen were still following from a distance. They noticed that this man seemed to have no destination. Specifically, he often approached and talked to women until late at night when he went to the bus station to rest. And even with money, he met a girl and was devastated. He followed the subject for the night. Two undercover police officers had grasped all of his movements and were preparing to attack. The arrest was planned the next morning. The man took a bus to the Central Market. Two undercover police officers immediately followed, approached and arrested the man and checked his briefcase. They found an ID card named M. CHIKATILO 51. Inside the bag there was also a dirty face towel, a bar of soap, a 20 cm long knife, and 2 rolls of rope, and a jar of Vaseline. Clearly these are not items that normal people carry with them, the police said. Asked about the uses of these things, Chikatilo calmly explained that he worked as a clerk in a factory. Construction materials, rope used to tie up cargo boxes, knife used to cut rope. The nature of his job requires him to travel frequently, so he uses Velen to shave his face and wash his room. Personal hygiene items. Chikatilo explanation sounds reasonable, however, with what has been observed. Police remained suspicious of his behavior while in custody. Chikatilo was held with 2 other men. The other man was actually 2 undercover agents planted by the police to access and exploit information from Chikatilo to verify whether he is the wanted serial killer in Boss Cell. The man chatted quite openly and quickly got to know each other. Chikatilo said he really liked young women and every month he goes to Don Ho or the countryside along the Don River 2 or 3 times to look for love. When asked about the killer, Chikatilo's mass shooting showed little concern and said to let the police investigate. While talking, when he learned that one of the 2 cellmates, Dr. Chikatilo, was very enthusiastic about the entire conversation of the 3 men regarding school attendance was under police surveillance. Although Chikatilo did not breathe, H's characteristics closely matched what the police had gathered about the suspect. Serial killer to verify for sure. Investigators took blood samples from Chikatilo to compare with semen samples collected at previous crime scenes. However, at that time, DNA testing technology had not yet been applied. Using FAR by experts can only conduct analysis and compare antigen and blood results show Chikatilo had blood type A, while the antigen in semen collected at the crime scene belonged to blood type AB. Chikatilo's mismatched results were cleared, and he was released until October. In 1984, police discovered a total of 23 victims related to the murderer. A series of them included 4 boys between 10 and 14 years old, whose genitals were. The victims were all either murdered or showed signs of being attacked through analysis of the wounds on the victims' bodies, especially stab wounds on the body below the collarbone. Police suspect the killer may be a person working in medical-related work and has a tendency to have deviant sexual tendencies. By Thai, but the murders still continue to spread terror to people. People fear that they or their family members will become. Next victim, August 1985, in Forest Gs Bay Domodovo Mas CVA police. Police discovered a murder case with signs of a serial killer. The victim was an 18-year-old girl. Her hands were severed. The dog cut on the neck and chest with 38 knife blades. The cause of death was determined to be suffocation. The time of death was about 3 days. Police have previously checked all flight schedules between Moscow and Rotterdam in recent times, but still not finding anything unusual. People gave this serial killer many nicknames, such as the Butcher who burned the city, the Red Ripper, or the Butcher of the City. In December 1985, was seriously injured. The importance of the case led the Soviet government to launch an unprecedented large-scale anti-crime campaign called the War. Lazo Polo's forest clearance campaign was deployed. A large number of human resources were mobilized to control the investigation. Many people also volunteered to support the police. A helicopter was mobilized for Tuan to conduct aerial inspections at the mountain and forest areas are surrounded by many undercover police officers stationed at the park's train stations and public places. They disguised themselves as workers, killed farmers, and even homeless people to blend in with the crowd watching every move of every suspicious person. A year has passed. The Lazo Polo's campaign has not yet brought positive results. However, the number of murder cases has shown signs of decreasing compared to before. The bodies of the victims found were all in a state of decomposition. The heavy damage shows that the time of the crime was quite long. 2 years after the Lazo Polo's campaign was launched, the police arrested another serial sociopath at the named Anatoly Sliko Slipsy has invaded. He committed the crime and murdered 4 students at the prison. After being sentenced, he still tried to create bad luck. The fake school was set up to blame the Butcher TP. However, Slip took the victim's property while the Butcher DOP fought back. No hobby. Less than a year after being arrested, Slip C was sentenced to death, while the Lopal Losa campaign still being deployed. The Butcher's portrait is gradually being sketched more clearly, with the male character aged 45 and over to 50, no signs of mental illness or third-lang intelligence, has family and stable job. His job, it may involve a lot of traveling, or he himself has his own personal means of transportation. Is a normal person, tall and thin, has a trustworthy appearance, easily gains trust from gullible people. Although the victims were also men, police believe the killer was likely a heterosexual, meaning he likes Lu Jioi. He satisfies his sexual needs by witnessing the suffering of the victim, most likely the perpetrator, from being abused or having bad experiences in the past, so they often attack male victims more brutally. Genital mutilation. In 1990, A case that seemed to have reached a dead end has appeared. A new lead emerged in November 1990. Rostov police received a tip of a local resident who said that while Ha was in the forest near a village in the Krasnosolinki district, he discovered the body of a woman, the victim identified as Vest Lala Kosti, young girl, only 22 years old. Some witnesses said they saw V. Lala talking to a religious man at the BP bus station earlier. An autopsy showed she died of acute blood loss, with the time of death being approximately a week earlier on the body. The victim had many bullets on the tip of the tongue and the breast had been removed. The bullets were torn off the wound. All these signs were present. This coincided with the previous murder cases committed by the butcher. The police quickly arrived at Yen Triuang, conducting an investigation at a nearby train station. A patrol police officer said about a week ago while on duty, he stopped a strange-looking man for an administrative check. The man was wearing rather shabby clothes, carrying a black bag that locals often go into the nearby forest to pick mushrooms. The police initially thought this man also came here to play Nam. However, he wore a rather polite suit, unlike his outfit. The man's daily routine attracted the attention of the police officer, who asked the man to stop. Came back to check. This man explained that he was here on business. After finishing work, he had the idea of going into the forest of mushrooms, so he didn't have time to change clothes. The above explanation sounds reasonable. Moreover, it was already dark at that time. The police officer only glanced at the man's ID card and saw that his name was Chikatilo LN. Thinking the black bag was for mushrooms, they let him leave. Only then did the police panic and realize it was Chikatilo. Is the man who was arrested 6 years ago, although Min Hon, but the Chikatilo appeared near the scene. The murder after 6 years is such a coincidence that the police decided to secretly investigate Chikatilo again on the 17th. In November 1990, police began tracking Chikatilo for the next 3 days. Chikatilo's whereabouts are still suspicious like 6 years ago. After work hours, he often approaches and starts a conversation. Used to girls or guys going alone, he often though they go to other places to meet once after being rejected. He was so disappointed that he walked across the street without paying attention. He was almost hit by a car on the 4th day since he was. Follow up after I did Chikatilo go to a private clinic to x-ray my finger in. He bandaged his wound, then went home for a while, then went out to buy a can of beer around 5 p.m. on the way home. Chikatilo approached and tried to talk to a boy. Immediately 3 undercover police, following behind, rushed to control and arrest him. When checking Chikatilo's residence, the police found 2 or 3 children. With a knife and a hammer, they discovered a pair of shoes with the exact size and sole pattern, complete with shoe prints, collected at the crime scene 6 years ago. In addition, in Chikatilo's bag there was also a knife and rope. Vaseline, identical to what was found in his bag 6 years ago, wounds on the victim's body. The victims in the previous murders did not match the atmosphere found at the last Chikatilo house after many years of hiding. Police were able to confirm that the butcher was indeed Chikatilo, and Chikatilo was arrested. Chikatilo kept quiet. He was silent for 7 days. However, when he saw the criminal psychology analysis that the police had prepared, he suddenly confessed everything. His crime. Chikatilo burst into tears. I want to tell you all, there are too many things contained in. He confessed all his crimes without any remorse or sympathy for his horrible victims. Chikatilo committed more murders than the police have ever discovered. Chikatilo confessed to 27 more murders. The reason these cases are not linked is because the crime scenes are located in different locations. The difference is not only that some of the victims' bodies have not yet been found, or that someone else has been convicted. It is noteworthy that according to the testimony of Ms. C, the first murder he committed was the murder of Anina Zakat Nova. 12 years ago at that time, this case was closed. With the suspect sentenced to death, no one expected this to be a case of wrongful conviction. Chikatilo recounts the incident as follows. On the evening of December 22, 1978, on the bus, he saw Anina Zakat Nova was 9 years old when he heard the girl say she was on her way to her friend's house to play Chikatilo knew. She must have been alone, so he lured her to his house, saying that his house had a imported chewing gum. At that time, imported chewing gum was a very rare thing. The innocent little Anina agreed. Followed him, but as soon as they entered the wooden house, Chikatilo turned around and said something bad. The game with the girl was fiercely resisted by Hen. Chikatilo had a tantrum and used sow. Stabbed the girl 3 times in a row. While doing it cruelly, Chikatilo felt an unprecedented excitement. He then used his hands to strangle Anina to death after she choked Chikatilo. He stabbed her in the eye socket with a knife because he had heard that if the victim's pupils reflected the image of the killer, if a person dies, their soul will haunt that person forever. That is why in the early years of the Chikatilo conspiracy, the victim later heard that this was baseless, so he stopped doing it after satisfying his craving. Chikatilo threw Adina's body and her belongings into the nearby Cup Zka River too. The next day, Anina's body was found, although police suspected Chikatilo. Not understanding why Kravchenko became the prime suspect in the case, Chikatilo himself was very surprised when Kravchenko was wrongly convicted and executed in his place. Since then, all his crimes, the evil that Chikatilo caused, all stemmed from his desire to recapture the feeling of euphoria that he once experienced in his life. Chikatilo's first murder case was similar to his usual practice of using food to lure his victims. Sometimes he sought out prostitutes and lured them to secluded places to do it. He brutally murdered and even ate the victim's flesh or cut off some body parts to take home. This feeling of satisfaction with fate increasingly dominated Chikatilo, making him unable to stop in 1984 when he was 48. Chikatilo's age caused the most number of murders with 15 victims also in this year. He was followed by police and arrested. However, due to the limitations of testing technology at that time, the blood group antigen test results were rejected. The bias has made him lucky. To excuse this, some experts say that in very rare cases the men's blood may differ from the antigens in the body's secretions. Another hypothesis is that the test sample was contaminated. Infection gave inaccurate results not long after Chikatilo was convicted. 1 year of labor reform for theft of property. However, after only 3 months, he was released before could be released on good behavior in late 1985, when police launched a campaign. Tiarque Leso Polos Chikatilo even volunteered to help. Police officers conduct administrative checks at the train station. Seeing the police busily investigating but unable to find the boss, he felt helpless. Enjoy together, however, to avoid suspicion. Chikatilo was also very careful to hide his whereabouts throughout the year. 1986. He did not commit any murder in 1987. Chikatilo committed 3 murders. All the times he took advantage of business trips to commit crimes in other places outside the capital. This made the police mistakenly thought he had stopped, but in fact Chikatilo never intended to stop. He was just going up. Just to be more careful, there were times after committing the crime, Chikatilo even hid the victim's body to avoid being discovered on the day of the crime. I got caught because my finger was aching for many days. Chikatilo went to a private clinic to take an X-ray, and the results showed that my finger was really aching. His middle arm was scratched. This was the injury he received when he raped a 16-year-old boy about half an hour ago. The month before, the boy had resisted fiercely and had kicked his leg, causing him to limp for a while. Chikatilo himself probably did not expect that just because he went to see a doctor and bought a can of beer, he would be caught in the police's sights. The case of the Butcher Row TP was officially closed after Chikau was arrested, meaning that during the time the Leso Polos crackdown was underway, the police investigated and busted the gang. 1062 cases unrelated to Chikatilo, including 95 murders, 140 cases of intentional injury, and 245 cases of rape, totaled the campaign cost up to 10 million, double about 2.7 billion VND. At the current exchange rate, after the guy who dumped the capital city was extremely far from public opinion. Hong and many people are curious to know what turned him into a cold-blooded killer and carried the emperor. So to answer the above question, let's go back in time to the point where Chikatilo was born in October 1936. And Chikatilo was born into a poor peasant family in a small village in the Sumy region of Ukraine. Chikatilo's parents were both was a farmer in an agricultural cooperative who lived off the fields at a time when the country had just gone through war and heavy. Chikatilo's family was poor and often in a state of hunger. Chikatilo's mother often told. He said he had an older brother, but due to famine, the boy was kidnapped and eaten when he was only 4 years old. Chikatilo was not born yet. When Chikatilo was 6 years old, his father joined the Red Army and Soviet Union left their homeland. 2 years later, his mother gave birth to another daughter, named Tatiana, at the age of 8. Chikatilo started going to school. He loved studying, but because of his weak health, he was often bullied by his friends at home. Chikatilo's father was a gentle and easygoing man, in contrast to her mother's strict personality, who often scolded high. Chikatilo brothers, when the family's economic conditions gradually became more stable, Chikatilo focused more on studying, but when he reached the age of easy, the boy realized he had a physiological problem. At the age of 17, Chikatilo brought. He loves a girl, but his inferiority complex about his own shortcomings makes him not dare to confess his feelings once. Chikatilo threw his sister's friend to the ground. The girl struggled to get free. At this moment, Chikatilo suddenly, feeling liberated, graduated from high school. Chikatilo applied and Moscow State University but failed. After working for 3 months, he felt it was not suitable, so he decided to enroll in a vocational school. Studying telecommunication line engineering at the age of 19, at school Chikatilo met and fell in love with a girl. The relationship lasted about a year and a half. Then it ended due to Chikatilo's physiological problems. Chikatilo graduated and went to work in the city, St. Petersburg, and studied police engineering shortly after. Chikau joined the army after 3 years of military service. At the age of 24, Chikatilo was discharged and returned to his hometown. He met and fell in love with another girl. But just like last time, their relationship quickly ended because Chikatilo couldn't satisfy her needs, his girlfriend's physiology. But the difference is that after this time, friends and relatives all know about Chikatilo's problem. Became a laughing stock to everyone. No girl wanted to date him. Chikatilo felt extremely miserable, and he was so desperate that he wanted to do something stupid. But his family and friends advised him to gradually calm down and make a decision. Continue to live. Chikatilo left UC Dana to burn top to work. A few months later, 18 years old girl, Tatiana, also came to big city to study. Not long after, Tatiana got married with a local man. 27 years old, Chikatilo was introduced by his sister to marry her sister's friend Fane. Atasa, 24 years old, after getting married, Chikatilo studied Russian language at university. Rostov and his wife have a daughter and a son named Lyuzmila, and ANDREI respectively after graduation. Chikatilo University as a teacher at a school in Lovo, Satin, however, in the process of teaching the nature of. Chikatilo rose again. He often used the excuse of teaching to harass or beat female students. Chikatilo broke into a student's dormitory and was transferred to another job, but he quickly found another one, also in the education industry, and continued to satisfy his sexual desires by sexually abusing girls in August of that year, 1991, to determine whether Chikatilo had the capacity to bear criminal responsibility. He was taken to a psychiatric institute for evaluation 2 months after tests showed he was suffering from schizophrenia. Borderline personality disorder has sadistic tendencies and enjoys torturing others, but is still capable of taking responsibility. Before the law. April 1992, Chikatilo trial opened. At the trial, Chika continuously had strange behaviors then suddenly she screamed and cursed, then took off her clothes and showed her genitals in front of the crowd. She even claimed to be a woman. Chikatilo was initially charged with 56 counts of murder, however during the trial, due to lack of evidence, only 52 charges were proven. Then the Supreme People's Court of Russia dismissed the case. 9 more fish were charged with killing another person. Chikatilo was eventually indicted on 43 counts of murder. The trial lasted for 6 months. October 1992, People's Court declared defendant ANDREI Chikatilo guilty. Convicted of murder and sentenced to death, the defendant appealed, but was imprisoned by back. Chikatilo wrote a letter to the Russian president. At that time was Boris-Jin to ask for amnesty, but failed finally in the evening. Valentine's Day, October 14, 1994, Andrei Chikau was executed at the convent of Love. The gunshot ended the criminal life of the 58-year-old man and also somewhat eased the pain of the victims' families. Lottery person. It is noteworthy that Chikatilo's wife, Mrs. Fina, OS NASA still cannot. T got married to her husband, who was a top butcher. In fact, Mrs. Fina knew about the fertility problem. Her husband's reason for a long time. That's why it's even harder for her to believe that the gentle, quiet husband she has lived with for 3 years. The devil in human form committed many terrible crimes after Chikatilo was arrested. Mrs. Fina divorced and, however, her life was still greatly affected. Someone wrote threatening words to Nguyen Rua on the internet. Mailbox in front of her house. Finally, Mrs. Fina was forced to move away to live with her stepdaughter Louis Ma. Having lost contact with Chikatilo before his arrest, she was the first in the family to notice his abnormality. Usually of the father, because previously Louis Mila had discovered that Chikatilo had intentions. She planned to commit a dirty deed with Jury's son. Since then, she never spoke to her father again in the Chikatilo family. Only Judy's son defended him. Judy insisted that Chikatilo was a good father is not abnormal and cannot commit such terrible crimes. However, no one cares. Judy's words, because he himself was also a man with a bad past before. When Chikatilo was arrested, Rudy was arrested by the police for robbing $10,000 worth of property with his accomplices to save. Vina's son had to sell all the furniture in the house to Heen in the end. The Rostov butcher was sentenced to 2 years in prison and is considered one of the most cold-blooded and brutal murderers of the 20th century. He was also shunned by the locals and forced to leave his homeland and start a new life in a new land. The butcher case was closed, but its echoes still haunt Russia to this day. Chikatilo's actions can never make up for the painful loss he has caused to the families of his victims. The story of ANDREI Chikatilo is a warning to society about the invisibility of crime and the importance of crime prevention. Fighting crime is also an expensive lesson for the Soviet judicial system at that time, when investigative technology was still backward. The investigation still has many shortcomings, creating loopholes for crimes to run rampant, allowing a cold-blooded killer like CHIKATILO to be brought to justice. Can be lingering outside the law for a long time, even though many years have passed, the people still cannot. How can one forget the horror that the butcher TP spread? The story about him is still passed on by word of mouth, but a harsh reminder of the truth that sometimes evil lurks in the guise of ordinary people living all around us, and sow the seeds of evil when we least expect it. Today's video ends here, and see you again in the next videos. Next, please. Hello.